2024 was an incredible year for weather, having an extremely active tornado season in the spring, a very backloaded Atlantic hurricane season, several powerful earthquakes around the globe, and a whole lot more. This video will detail each severe weather event from January to June this year in order, starting with only 7 hours after the clock struck midnight in Japan, a magnitude 7.5 earthquake hit the Noto Peninsula for 50 seconds, causing over $17 billion in damage, 475 fatalities, and 1,380 injuries. Landslides and a 24.4-foot tsunami were produced as a result of this earthquake. The first tornado of 2024 occurred in the Belgian province of Antwerp on January 3rd, causing IF 1.5 damage. The first U.S. tornado touched down northwest of Lake Jackson, Texas. The last tropical cyclone of 2023, Cyclone Alvaro, dissipated about 800 miles southeast of Reunion Island. A Category 1 winter storm, which went on to produce blizzards across the U.S. and over $2 billion in damage, formed over the western United States. A tornado outbreak associated with the winter storm began, producing 3 EF0 tornadoes across Louisiana and Mississippi. This was the largest day of the outbreak, featuring 32 tornadoes from Florida to North Carolina. The first EF3 of the year happened on this day in Lower Grand Lagoon, Florida. The 2 fatalities from this outbreak were on this day. The first tropical cyclone of 2024, Cyclone Ongrek, formed on this day in the southern Indian Ocean. The Category 1 winter storm dissipated. A second Category 1 winter storm formed, eventually causing $3 billion in damage and almost 50 inches of snow in Mountain Reservoir, Colorado. A strong tornado which damaged over 250 homes and injured 19 people struck a few villages in East Java, Indonesia. At 2:09 a.m. Chinese Standard Time, a powerful magnitude 7.0 earthquake hit Ukturpan County, China, south of the Kyrgyzstan border. This quake killed 3 people and injured 74, a majority of which were in Kyrgyzstan. Cyclone Ongrek reached a peak strength of 140 miles per hour. Wildfires began burning in central Chile. Only 4 days after igniting, the Chilean wildfires were fully contained after burning over 16,000 acres of forests. This was described as the country's worst disaster since the 2010 earthquake after it caused 137 fatalities and $4.39 billion in damage. A supercell produced the first ever Wisconsin tornadoes in the month of February. One of these was rated EF1 and the other EF2. A very short-lived EF1 tornado in Grover Beach, California also happened on this day. Cyclone Jungu formed in the South Indian Ocean. A rare southern Atlantic tropical cyclone formed and was given the name Akara. Cyclone Jungu attained peak winds of 145 miles per hour and a central pressure of 942 millibars. 2 days after reaching peak intensity, Jungu dissipated a few hundred miles west of Australia. Tropical storm Akara dissipated east of far southern Brazil after producing absolute eye candy on satellite imagery. A downed power line a mile north of Stinnett, Texas sparked a fire which very quickly spread to the east and engulfed northern portions of the Smokehouse Creek, which is how the wildfire got its name. To the southwest, a separate fire started, eventually being known as the Windy Deuce Fire. A small tornado outbreak consisting of 3 EF0s, 5 EF1s, and 1 EF unknown occurred in the Chicago metro area. One of these tornadoes struck north of the Gary-Chicago International Airport after dark, producing EF1 damage. The town of Grand Blanc, Michigan suffered an impact from a tornado as well. However, this one was stronger, being rated EF2. Going back to Texas, the Smokehouse Creek fire had already burned over 1 million acres by this point, making it the largest fire in the state's history since 1988. To the northeast, in Ellis County, Oklahoma, another wildfire started, this time human-caused and not nearly as widespread. A continuation of the previous day's outbreak featured 8 tornadoes in Ohio spanning the I-70 corridor from Dayton to eastern Columbus. 2 of these tornadoes were rated EF2. A tropical low formed near the Cocos Islands in the Indian Ocean, eventually being named Neville. 2 EF2 tornadoes formed in northeastern Kansas. Despite the inactivity of this day, one of these tornadoes became quite notable due to its stunning look on radar. This tornado was the one near Alta Vista. A disturbance formed north of Australia, soon being named Megan. A regional tornado outbreak took place in Ohio and Indiana. This outbreak had 10 tornadoes, 2 of which were rated to EF3. The first of these impacted the towns of Lakeview and Russell's Point, Ohio, causing severe damage to a mobile home and 3 fatalities. This made it the deadliest tornado of the year so far. The second EF3 struck the town of Winchester, Indiana, with winds estimated to be at 165 miles per hour. It's possible this tornado was actually at low-end EF4 strength, but surveys were unable to find enough evidence to back this claim up. The Windy Deuce fire was finally fully contained after burning over 140,000 acres over the course of 16 days. 2 days after the nearby Windy Deuce fire was contained, the Smokehouse Creek fire was as well, after burning 1,058,000 acres of land over 18 days. $4.6 billion in damage was caused, and despite the incredibly large area burned, only 2 fatalities occurred. Cyclone Megan reached peak strength of 105 miles per hour and a minimum pressure of 955 millibars as it looped over the Gulf of Carpentaria. Megan dissipates over Northern Territory, Australia 2 days after making landfall. Cyclone Neville attains winds of 130 miles per hour and a central pressure of 948 millibars about 500 miles southeast of Cocos Island. A magnitude 6.9 earthquake in Papua New Guinea shook the East Sepik province, killing 5 and injuring 2. Cyclone Neville dissipates in the southern Indian Ocean after traversing over 3,300 miles. A disturbance gets upgraded to Tropical Cyclone Gamen only 66 miles off the coast of far northern Madagascar. Despite being so close to shore, Gamen still managed to rapidly intensify into a Category 2 with winds of 100 miles per hour and a pressure of 970 millibars shortly before landfall. Unfortunately, this cyclone took the lives of 19 people and caused $77 million in damage. A multi-day tornado outbreak began when a storm in northeastern Oklahoma managed to produce 5 EF1s from south of Pawhuska to north of Delaware. One of these tornadoes hit the small town of Barnsdall, which suffered a second tornadic impact later in the year, with the second time being much worse. 5 other tornadoes touched down on this day in Missouri. 4 were rated EF0 and 1 was rated EF1. The outbreak continued into the next day with a line of 72 tornadoes stretching from Williamson County in southern Illinois to Fayette County in West Virginia. 14 of these tornadoes were rated EF2, half of which were situated around the Kentucky-Indiana-Illinois tri-point. West Virginia had 10 tornadoes on this day, the highest daily total in the state's history. The system that produced this outbreak was eventually classified as a derecho. Heading over to Asia, an earthquake shook the island of Taiwan. This quake registered as magnitude 7.4, making it the second most powerful of the year behind the January 1st Noto earthquake. Sadly, 18 people lost their lives and millions of dollars in damage was inflicted. The last day of the outbreak was much tamer than the previous, with only 4 tornadoes touching down from Florida to Virginia. A tropical low, later becoming Olga, formed on this day. It eventually managed to reach major hurricane status, making it the strongest tropical cyclone of the inactive month of April. After only 3 days over the ocean, Olga became a Category 4 with estimated winds of 135 miles per hour and a pressure of 939 millibars. A small outbreak in southern Louisiana and extreme southern Mississippi occurred, featuring 3 EF2s and a very compact tornado family in Slidell, Louisiana. This family had 1 EF unknown, 3 EF0s, 7 EF1s, and 1 EF2 for a total of 12 tornadoes in only a 38-mile span. There was also another EF2 in Lake Charles, which only tracked for just over a mile. A very rare EF0 touched down in Rusty Point, Alaska, near Anchorage. This was only the 5th ever tornado in the state's history and the first since 2005. A slender enhanced risk covering areas from Texas to Iowa was put in place by the SPC, indicating this day had the possibility to be somewhat severe. Hopes were mixed given the large number of underperformances from enhanced and moderate risk days earlier in the year. The first tornado of the day touched down near Pink, Oklahoma and caused EF0 damage. 7 more tornadoes rated EF0 or EF1 touched down in Oklahoma following this, before a supercell near Ravenna, Nebraska began producing tornadoes. One of these was an extremely low-based EF3 near Elba. This tornado appeared to be miles wide, but ended up actually only being 0.3 miles wide after surveys were completed. 2 EF2s touched down after this, one of which was long-lived. A second Nebraskan EF3 touched down just before 3 p.m. in the northeastern outskirts of Lincoln. This tornado was very photogenic as it traveled over mostly open fields. A large building was impacted on North 98th Street at EF3 intensity, with the winds estimated to be at 158 miles per hour. This tornado wasn't on the ground for very long and dissipated west of Waverly after only 5 minutes on the ground. After producing 3 weak tornadoes, this storm dropped another shortly after crossing the Platte River. The tornadoes spun northeast, slowly increasing in size before impacting a few houses on the edge of Elkhorn at EF4 strength. Like Elba, this tornado looked massive on video. However, it actually was, coming in at just over a mile wide. It continued at varying intensity before causing EF4 damage to a few rural houses south of Blair. The tornado dissipated not long after, south of Modale, Iowa. Despite causing millions in damage, this tornado could have been way worse. If it struck just a few miles to the east, a much more densely populated area would have been struck, destroying thousands of homes and possibly causing dozens of fatalities. 3 other EF3s touched down in Iowa after this, one of which impacted the towns of Minden and Harlan, causing 1 fatality. This tornado had measured winds of 224 miles per hour. However, this happened while it wasn't impacting any structures and was in turn not rated EF5. This was another very active day of the outbreak, featuring almost 5 dozen tornadoes, including 2 EF3s and 1 EF4. The first of these EF3s touched down after dark at 10:23 p.m. about 2.5 miles southwest of Sulphur, Oklahoma. This tornado strengthened very quickly, attaining peak strength as it struck downtown with estimated winds of 165 miles per hour, making it a very high-end EF3. This tornado unfortunately caused 1 fatality. To the northeast, a minute before this tornado lifted, a second EF3 touched down southeast of Spalding. Traveling north, it narrowly missed the town of Holdenville, as well as grazed the Davis Correctional Facility. Shortly after crossing Highway 270, EF3 damage was caused to 2 homes on East-West 131. More EF3 damage was caused along the North Canadian River shortly before the tornado dissipated. The last EF3 plus tornado touched down at 11:08 p.m. southwest of Marietta. This tornado very quickly reached its peak intensity, causing low-end EF4 damage to a Dollar General and grocery store with estimated winds of 170 miles per hour. A large Dollar Tree distribution center was also hit shortly before this. The tornado dissipated about 24.5 miles later after producing mainly EF1 damage for a majority of its life. A very photogenic tornado struck the town of Westmoreland, Kansas, causing low-end EF3 damage and 1 fatality. 10 more tornadoes touched down across Kansas and Oklahoma before a nocturnal supercell in southwestern Oklahoma produced a very large and powerful tornado near Hollister. This tornado touched down only about 8 miles from the KFDR radar, allowing for a very detailed view of the tornado's velocity. Based off the radar measurements, it could have possibly been violent, but only EF1 damage was found where the tornado hit. A storm northeast of Abilene, Texas produced a small, photogenic tornado near Hawley, which inflicted high-end EF3 damage to 2 well-built homes. It's been argued that this tornado was likely violent, possibly having winds higher than its estimated 165 mile per hour peak. The 2 homes it hit at peak strength were well constructed and had their foundations completely swept away. A tornado touched down south of Robert Lee, Texas and moved southeast, inflicting low-end EF3 damage to a home west of State Highway 208. This storm was unique, since on radar it appeared to wrap around itself and form a hole where the tornado was. Staying in Texas, a storm south of Fort Stockton produced 5 photogenic tornadoes along the west side of Highway 285. The first of these was rated EF2, and the other 4 were rated EF unknown. The only SPC high risk of 2024 was issued, being driven by a 30% risk of tornadoes. Due to the lack of strong supercells ahead of the squall line, this event ended up underperforming. However, one cell managed to produce a strong, long-lived tornado before being absorbed into the line. This tornado touched down south of Hominy, Oklahoma at 9:12 p.m. It quickly strengthened to an EF3, causing severe damage to several transmission lines south of State Highway 20. It briefly weakened to an EF1 before reaching peak intensity as it completely swept away a well-built home with estimated winds of 180 miles per hour. By this point, the tornado was clearly very strong and about to hit the small town of Barnsdall. This led the NWS to issue a tornado emergency for the town. Luckily, the tornado mostly missed the populated area but still caused 2 fatalities. Shortly after hitting Barnsdall, the parent storm got absorbed into the squall line, causing the tornado to weaken to EF1 to EF2 intensity for the rest of its life. Not long before dissipating at 10:07, the city of Bartlesville was hit, with mostly minor damage being caused. A continuation of the previous day's outbreak featured 59 tornadoes, including 6 EF2s. One of these struck the counties of St. Joseph and Branch, Michigan at 5:41 p.m. For most of the beginning of the tornado's life, it remained at EF0 to EF1 strength before increasing to an EF2 as it damaged a home along Orla Angle Road. It weakened back to an EF1 as it struck a neighborhood along the St. Joseph River. At the same time, the first ever tornado emergency in the state's history was issued for the storm. The tornado reached peak intensity north of Sherwood as it inflicted damage with estimated wind speeds of 130 miles per hour. Another EF2, which happened around the same time, struck the city of Portage to the north, with winds around 135 miles per hour. 3 EF3s were produced from an outbreak that affected mainly southern Tennessee and northern Alabama. The first of these touched down east of Columbia, Tennessee at 5:37 p.m. After gradually increasing in strength, the tornado reached peak intensity of 140 miles per hour as it moved over the community of Lysaea. The tornado then slowly weakened before dissipating at 6:07. The second EF3 touched down near Wheeler Lake, Alabama at 8:23 p.m. A majority of the tornado's path was over water, but it still managed to cause low-end EF3 damage to a home in Beechwood Acres shortly before lifting. The last EF3 occurred south of Henniger, where it did EF3 level damage to a metal building with estimated winds of 143 miles per hour. 2 long-lived EF2 tornadoes impacted the heavily populated portions of southern Tallahassee, Florida, during the morning of the 10th. These 2 tornadoes caused almost $200 million in damage, as well as 2 fatalities. Also on this day, the most powerful geomagnetic storm since March 1989 hit the Earth, causing brilliant aurora as far south as Florida. This was one of the few events on this list I was lucky enough to experience, and anyone who saw it can agree it was one of the best displays of aurora in recent memory. This storm was classified as a G5 extreme geomagnetic storm, the first since October 2003. The Laguna 24 wildfire began in southern Texas, eventually becoming the 4th largest in the state in 2024. A derecho began in Texas and quickly strengthened as it impacted the Houston metro area with winds of at least 100 miles per hour. 3 tornadoes also formed in the northwestern parts of the city, all of which were rated EF1. The system then traveled for over 1,000 more miles along the Gulf Coast before dissipating near the Florida Big Bend the next day. This derecho caused 8 fatalities and over $1.2 billion in damage along its path. Several storms in Oklahoma and Kansas dropped tornadoes on the evening of the 19th, one of which produced a massive EF2 west of Custer City, Oklahoma. This tornado traveled east over mostly open fields with winds of at least 118 miles per hour. This storm looked pretty bad on radar and appeared to be heading straight for Custer City. This prompted the NWS to issue a tornado emergency. However, the tornado dissipated a few miles to the west before it could hit the town. A line of storms in southwestern Iowa produced a tornado south of Neiman at 2:43 p.m. Moving northeast at a low strength, it inflicted EF2 damage northwest of Villisca. At around the same time as this, another tornado touched down to the southeast, paralleling the first at a similar strength. At 1:08, the first tornado reached peak winds of 152 miles per hour as it destroyed a house on 150th Street at EF3 intensity. 12 minutes later, on the same road about 10 miles to the east, the eastern tornado also destroyed a house at EF3 strength. However, it was stronger, having winds of at least 165 miles per hour. As it continued to the northeast, it traveled directly through a wind farm, toppling multiple wind turbines. This was caught on video by storm chaser Reed Timmer. By now, the tornado was also exhibiting extreme multi-vortex behavior, with some of the subvortices having subvortices within. Northeast of Gilead, 2 homes were swept away with winds of 170 miles per hour, now making the tornado an EF4. After this, it hit another 2 houses at the same intensity before entering the town of Greenfield. Here, many homes were completely destroyed with estimated winds as high as 185 miles per hour. However, a nearby mobile Doppler radar recorded a 1-second gust of 318 miles per hour 48 yards above the ground. This puts the Greenfield tornado as the 3rd strongest tornado ever recorded based off winds. It was also calculated by mechanical engineer and YouTuber Ethan Moriarty, whose channel you should check out, that winds of at least 247 to 283 miles per hour are required to rip concrete parking blocks out of the ground, which this tornado did. Despite all this, the current enhanced Fujita scale only takes into account certain damage indicators, not measured winds and unconventional damage like parking blocks. Because of this, the Greenfield tornado is and will likely remain as an EF4. This tornado unfortunately caused 5 fatalities and over $31 million in damage. A powerful EF3 struck rural land south of Sterling City, Texas, causing severe ground scouring and tree debarking. This tornado impacted basically no structures, so there was little to base its strength off of. Based off what little was hit, the tornado was rated an EF3 with winds of 140 miles per hour. However, it's possible it could have been stronger. Another storm 200 miles to the east produced a strong tornado over western Temple suburbs, which was rated EF2 and caused 30 injuries. A tornado touched down north of El Dorado, Oklahoma at 7:04 p.m. This tornado quickly increased in size and intensity, reaching over a mile in width after only a minute on the ground. Like many others this year, this tornado was very photogenic, having a well-defined, smooth funnel for a lot of its life. A Doppler on wheels was present while this tornado was on the ground and recorded high winds within. This, combined with the extensive ground scouring left by the tornado, indicates it was likely much stronger than its EF2 rating. A low-pressure area over the southern Philippines strengthened into a depression and was given the name Agon. Over in the northern Indian Ocean, Cyclone Remal formed in the Bay of Bengal. In New Boston, Texas, a questionable tornado emergency was issued, and by the time it happened, the tornado it was issued for, which was only an EF1, had already lifted. During the late evening hours at 9:39 p.m., a tornado touched down south of Salona, Texas. It traveled east-southeast for about 32 miles before impacting a neighborhood south of Valley View at EF3 intensity with winds of 140 miles per hour. Unfortunately, 7 fatalities occurred here, making this tornado the deadliest of the year so far, and the deadliest in the US for the whole year. It also reached its peak width of just under 0.8 miles here. The tornado then continued for another 14 miles at EF1 strength before dissipating north of Pilot Point an hour and 36 minutes after touching down. 4 minutes later, another tornado formed over Limestone, Oklahoma. Traveling east, it slowly gained strength and developed a very well-defined hook echo as it entered the city of Claremore. Here, in the southern portions of downtown, EF2 damage was inflicted with winds of 120 miles per hour. It then weakened to an EF1 for a few miles before reaching a peak intensity of 155 miles per hour as it inflicted EF3 damage to a few homes northeast of Cherokee Casino. It traveled for another 7.5 miles at EF2 strength, with a small patch of EF3 damage towards the end, before dissipating at 11:59. This tornado caused 2 fatalities and 23 injuries during its 23.9 miles on the ground. Going back south, 5 minutes after the Valley View tornado dissipated, an EF1 touched down north of Salina, Texas. As it traveled southeast, a very brief satellite tornado accompanied it for only 1 minute. Despite being on the ground for such a short time, this tornado managed to reach peak winds of at least 165 miles per hour as it impacted a neighborhood south of the EF1. This put it as an EF3, 1 mile per hour shy of an EF4 rating. If it did manage to reach EF4 strength, it would have been the shortest traveling violent tornado since the 1995 Marion, South Carolina F4. The supercell which produced the Claremore EF3 dropped another EF3 north of Tawnees, Oklahoma near the Arkansas border at 12:59 a.m. This tornado managed to reach a peak width of 1.81 miles, making it the largest tornado in Arkansas history and the 10th largest ever. It reached peak winds of 155 miles per hour northwest of Decatur right before lifting. This storm then produced several more large tornadoes, including a 1.7 mile wide EF2 over Rogers. A few hours later, 2 large, long-lasting EF3s touched down near the Ozark Plateau. The first of these was on the ground for 37 minutes, had max winds of 145 miles per hour, and caused 4 fatalities. The second was on the ground for 52 minutes, had max winds of 140 miles per hour, and caused 1 fatality. After this, dozens more tornadoes touched down across several states. 4 of these were rated EF3, the last of which was rated just under an EF4. Had it been rated this, it would have been the third violent tornado in the Arlington, Kentucky area in under 20 years. Over in the Bay of Bengal, Cyclone Remal reached peak strength of 65 mph sustained winds as it made landfall south of Kolkata. This storm eventually took the lives of a total of 84 people in India and Bangladesh. Typhoon Awinia reached peak intensity of 1 minute sustained winds of 110 mph east of Luzon. The Laguna 24 fire in southern Texas became 100% contained after burning 12,385 square miles. In Phoenix, Arizona, highs reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and they wouldn't dip under this temperature for almost another 4 months, the longest streak in the city's history. 2 tornadoes touched down in the Midland, Texas area. The first of these was rated EF2 with winds of 115 miles per hour. It also prompted NWS Midland Odessa to issue a tornado emergency, the first ever in the office's jurisdiction. The second tornado was rated EF3 with winds of 140 miles per hour based off debarked trees. A relatively unknown tornadic event from this year happened in Sanderson, Texas, when 2 very short-lived tornadoes touched down in the town. The first one managed to reach EF3 strength with 140 mph winds. It injured 12 in a small neighborhood northwest of Sanderson. The second was weaker, having winds of 110 miles per hour as it impacted the main part of town. A rare F3 in South Africa caused 12 fatalities, making it the deadliest of the year, and at least 120 injuries in the town of Othangathi. A magnitude 5.1 earthquake, the strongest in Angola since 2001, struck the Benguela province, causing 43 injuries and luckily no fatalities. An earthquake in the Razavi Khorasan province in Iran shook the area as a magnitude 4.9, killing 4 and injuring 120. The first system of the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season, Tropical Storm Alberto, formed in the Bay of Campeche. It reached peak strength of 50 miles per hour later in the day and made landfall near Tampico, Mexico the following morning. An unwarned, possibly violent tornado struck the small town of Whitman, Nebraska, with winds of at least 160 miles per hour. This event was a catastrophic fumble from NWS North Platte, since they did not warn the obviously strong tornado until NWS Omaha tagged them on Twitter, notifying them of the situation. Luckily, no fatalities were associated with this tornado. The strongest earthquake of June, and 5th strongest of the year, struck off the shore of Peru, southwest of Atiquapa, with a magnitude of 7.2. In the Atlantic, the soon-to-be historic Hurricane Beryl formed 1,200 miles west of Cape Verde as a tropical depression. Beryl became the earliest hurricane to reach Category 4 status in the Atlantic, beating the previous record of July 8th set by Hurricane Dennis in 2005. Staying in the Atlantic, Tropical Depression 3 formed in the Bay of Campeche. It became Tropical Storm Chris the next day, shortly before making landfall north of Veracruz, Mexico at its peak strength of 40 miles per hour. That wraps up the first half of the 2024 weather recap. I hope you enjoyed, and please consider subscribing so you can learn more about weather phenomena on my channel.